Welcome everyone to today's session of the ReEngine Consulting and Boyd Consulting webinar on how to improve your local government, get more and better services for less cost. ReEngine Consulting has worked with multiple local, state, and federal and international government agencies all around the world to make departments much more effective, efficient, and have costs be lowered, and have done it very successfully. Our two presenters for today, Alfredo Maique. He is a former administrator of several different Texas state government agencies for 10 years and a manager of multiple different systems. He led the improvement projects for 7 years and founded ReEngine Consulting to help local, state, and federal and global government agencies with their process improvement and ensure that they become much more effective. David Johnson spent 8 years with the Texas state government and several years in local government, and he has a strong background in data analytics, reporting, and process improvement at both the state and local agency level. Please help me in welcoming Alfredo Maique, who will be sharing our screen and kicking off the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, great. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you all are here. And it's important to mention that we would love it if you all are very active within the chat room as well, so that we can, and you're going to be representing, I guess, lots of other people. So flow with whatever questions or ideas that you may have within the chat room. Chris is going to interrupt me or David, who's ever speaking, and address whatever you would like to discuss. So please don't be bashful. Be a chat monger, right? As we go through, because we want that interaction. And this is going to be recorded and then played again and again and again to different groups. And so we want them to get a real feel for what's going on in the session. So let's go ahead and begin. So this is designed for local government, although you'll see a lot of the concepts will apply to all types of governments, but really the net is even more wider than that, right? Anything within the public sector or anything that I would call like has a significant level of bureaucracy, like for example, healthcare, you mentioned, Jane, earlier. Another one is education. Those are elements that in order for them to do their work and create their value, they require a rather heavy load of bureaucracy over time. So David and I have been spending a lot of time in North Dakota working for this gentleman and his office. He started an office of reinvention for government. And you can see his quote. He demonstrates a real good understanding of I think one of the best approaches to the challenge of government and trying to optimize and get it to be most effective for the people that it serves. And I think it deserves reading, right? Anything being done simply because that's the way we've always done it, which we affectionately call Wawadi, right, should be rigorously and respectfully questioned. And no matter what, we must have the courage to admit that we can always do better. So I like that for a couple reasons. So one, we need to rigorously analyze it, but we need to understand, and that's important because a lot of these processes have built by accretion over time. But we need to respectfully question these processes as well, because they create value, because they've evolved, because they've stood the test of time, and maybe not in the best, prettiest way, they meet public need. And then it also often takes a lot of courage to do things and challenge the way that we've always done it. And many times in government, we become a bit risk adverse. But I think it's important to always admit good word that we can do better. And with that spirit, we approach today's seminar. So we really want to invite your passion and imagination for the possibilities of that continuous improvement holds for your local government, right? What would it mean if you're able to accomplish more with less relative effort and stress and burden, right? What more could you do for your community? And we want you to get you excited about taking next steps in continuous improvement as well. But first, we got to start with a heavy topic, right? We have to start with the government performance dilemma, or the government performance gap that exists, where we have population and associated demands, things like the burden of COVID, things that are spiking, hurricanes that come in, challenges in terms of weather, and the available revenue to be able to meet those is dropping per citizen, which then puts government in a crushed position, right? Where we're feeling the crush. And how do we answer that? Is a great question. And when you can see that our legislatures, every time they come together in states or in city councils or whatever, they're often looking at these undesirable options, right? None of us like them. Increasing taxes, reducing governmental function, reducing functional quality of the work that we do, that hurts us. And more stress at a faster pace, and we're already often operating at a breakneck pace. And then finally accepting more risk. And the reason that that one's so tough is that it's often the most vulnerable among us, among the people that we serve, that risk gets passed down to. And they often pay the highest price for any type of cut, any type of belt tightening that we might see. So, but before we leave this slide, I want to hit an optimistic note. And I want to say that there is reason to take hope. There's reason to look forward to a government that can meet the needs of its citizen today and still have the energy to prepare for the challenges of tomorrow. And we can perhaps address those undesirable options without having to add resources, right? Well, we can perhaps be able to solve the government performance dilemma and the government performance gap with the existing resources that we have, okay? And that's what we're targeting in today's discussion, right? Taking the challenges that we face today and creating internally in the office, in the agency, the wherewithal to be able to address those challenges. And where we pulled this together from is we pulled it from Lean, where we try to reduce the amount of waste, Six Sigma, where we're reducing the benefits, reducing the defects that we might see to optimize the benefits. And then also the theory of constraint, where we want to achieve focus and target improvements at whatever is constraining us. We want to pay special attention to the bottlenecks that we have, right? With the ability to imagine and take stock of the potential of improving by 25 to 40%, which David and I would tell you is more on the low end once an organization gets rolling in continuous improvement, but that's often at the very beginning what we start to see. And then achieving more with less effort, being able to do the work, achieve more good for the less relative cost per item that we do. And then see our productivity, right? Be able to measure so that we know we're making good decisions, so that we can see our productivity and we know that we're producing quality units at less cost, and also understanding that cost at a deep level. So we understand what it costs to be able to accomplish a review of a restaurant that's in town, or to be able to do an on-site visit. How much does that cost? Or to place a child in the foster care program, or to process a Medicaid or a Medicare application. We need to know how much it costs so that we can make good decisions and apply our energy wisely. And imagine the capacity that you can gain if a team of 17 can do the work that it used to take a team of 20. So, and that relative capacity can be released within the organization anywhere you need it as you achieve focus, focus on the constraints within the organization, which is going to be a big part of today. So if you're familiar with these ideas of continuous improvement, none of these will come as a surprise, right? So in addition to identifying non-value and waste in our practices, we want to base our decisions on data. We want to gather that data. We want to focus on what's important, not just what is urgent. If we just pay attention to the urgencies, then we're firefighting all the time. But we want to have the ability to calmly think about what's important and to plan activities. We know that we can accomplish much more at a higher degree of quality, better and faster those activities that are planned and resourced over time than those that hit us and slam into us when we walk into work on Monday. There's also this expectation that we understand the customer and listen to the customer, and that we're unafraid of surveying the customer and learning what they think of our service that we provide. And just because it may be a monopoly doesn't mean that we have to, that there has to be sort of gates that we keep at the service because there may not be another place that that person can turn to for their driver's license, for example. We want to optimize the service we have. And we want to empower employees to provide ideas so that we can have sort of a shared improvement effort across the organization, regardless of rank or structure that we have. And if we are able to get a win-win-win type scenario, and I think you know the three wins, right? So a win for the organization that's able to achieve its goals, certainly, but a win for the customers who are able to get their service in a quality time, to time specifications in a quality way that meets their needs, but also a win for the people who do the work, right? So that we're working in a good environment, that we're not racing from fire to fire, but we're able to apply our judgment, our wrestle with those high cognitive skills and make good determinations as we do the work of government. In other words, we're and achieve more with less relative effort, right? And folks often, when they call in, when we're in seminars or we're talking to them in person, they often say, what's the greatest challenge that we have when organizations undertake continuous improvement and apply this improvement science? And the answer that I give is second grade. Because in second grade, when they taught us math, we sort of learned a zero-sum game, where if 6 + 2 = 8, if you take 1 away from one side of the equation, you have to take away 1 from the other side of the equation. If you add 1 to one side, you have to add to the other. But true continuous improvement synergy doesn't work that way. It's possible to increase the speed of an operation, increase the quality of the productivity of what you're doing, and increase the amount of work or the actual productivity of that quality work. And that is entirely possible in organizations. And today is to bring that to your attention and to demonstrate to you that that is absolutely the case, and that most organizations have at least 25% capacity within its own structure that is today invisible, but we hope to make visible so that you can deploy it where you want to in the structure. And the primary reason is resources are not used as effectively as they should be, right? One of the things that the lean of folks have done recently is add another waste to the 7 that they had. And the new waste is not utilizing human talent at its optimal level. Talent that exists in your organization, but not using it to the level that we can. You see, because resources are like those ladders that gentleman is trying to use to climb over that wall. If you give him another ladder, he's still not going to make it over that wall. He's got to be able to use those tools effectively. If you give somebody more puzzle pieces, but they don't know how to assemble the puzzle, more puzzle pieces will never be enough. So often David and I share a great story that I think is a wonderful metaphor for government, told to me by a friend of mine, Kevin Fox, from the Theory of Constraints community, from when he was a young man working for his dad and Ellie Goldratt, and he found himself in the 8 Mile road there in Detroit, and he was helping a bumper factory improve their productivity. And it wasn't something that the owner, the manager of the bumper factory found very amusing, is when a young gentleman fresh out of college came in and was going to try to tell him how to run his factory that he'd run for nearly 16 years. Kevin told him the same thing that I told you all, which is, if we apply the principles that we're going to talk about today and move your organization in the direction of continuous improvement, that you'll be able to improve by 25 to 40%. And when the boss heard this there in the bumper plant, he got beat red. He got angry, and he said, "What do you mean my folks are holding back? They're not holding back anything. They come here and they work their fingers to the bone. I think you just insulted everybody, Kevin, everybody in this outfit, me and everybody down there on that factory floor." So Kevin, not wanting to lose his very first job out of college, decided to change the subject. And he said, hey, boss, when you do look down on that factory floor, how do you get that feeling that things are going right? How do you get that feeling that you're making your shipments on time, that your folks are being productive, that they're operating together as a team? How do you know that they're doing good work? How do you know that you're going to have work for them in the coming days and months ahead? How will you know? And the boss said, well, Kevin, that's easy. When I look down there on that factory floor, I see that blue light. And when I see that blue light, I know those finishing important additions to that bumper are happening. It's getting ready to be quality tested and then shipped on out. And Kevin says, well, okay, boss, I get that, but where's the blue light? I don't see it down there. He said, oh, well, it's new in the shift. So we really haven't had time to untangle and get things rolling down there, but you'll see it soon enough. Kevin gets an idea. How about we go down there and check out where that blue light should be, and let's do an observation. So everybody stood up from the executive boardroom. They went down the stairs, and they all went down to where these 2 welders were that were supposedly, ostensibly working and showing the blue light as their arc from their acetylene torches. And Kevin got there, and here's what they saw. One had a clipboard, and he was hunting up and down these stacks of boxes looking for the super duper order from Bumper from Peterbilt so that they could ship on time, because if they didn't ship on time, Peterbilt threatened them, we're going to find some other provider. Oh, goodness. And then the other welder was changing out his acetylene tanks and taking out flux and soldering sticks and basically getting ready for the job. The gentleman who was hunting down the bumper boxes found the bumper that he needed, but it was buried in a bunch of pallets. So he had to go over and get a pallet jack, take off all the top pallets, find the one he needed, put that on the ground, and then put the pallets back on. Then he started to wrestle with this big, huge crate that was wire bound. He finally opened it. There was full of these packing, all this packing material, took all that out. Then he was going to pick up the bumper, but he realized this is a big bumper. I'm going to need to have my friend help me out. So he turned to the other welder. They put the bumper on a bumper stand, which they both had one of, put it on the bumper stand, and then bolted it down. So Kevin's looking at all of this, and he's saying, oh my goodness, these folks are the bottleneck in the organization. And that's why the boss identified blue light as so important. These folks are the ones that add the level of expertise. They're the highest paid individuals in the entire plant. And they are finding boxes and unpacking bumpers. And just then he sees the welder do something very odd. But the welder starts to reach up and scratch the bumper. Can you see that? Scratch the bumper. And he turns to the boss and he says, hey, boss, what's he doing? And he says, oh, he's taking off the plastic that we put on the bumper after we chrome it. And we got to take the plastic off in order to be able to do a proper weld. Otherwise, what happens is the weld will break very easily if there's impurities in the weld. So Kevin's thinking, oh my goodness, I sandbagged this guy. I told him 25% improvement or more, but gosh, I think I'm going to double his productivity, maybe triple it. Because what I see is the fact that these guys are wasting a lot of their time that they could be actually doing welding when they could have an assistant help them with some of these other more menial tasks. Or maybe we'll ask the shift before to do that work before they close out their shift the night before. And why do they only have two of these easels that they mount the bumper on? I'm going to buy 8 of those, 4 for each, so that way they never have to turn out their blue light. The team can replace the bumper, and all they have to do is turn around in a circle and do all of their torching. He's seeing all this potential for capacity, and he's about ready to give the good news to the boss. But before anything can come out of Kevin's mouth, the boss says, "You see, Kevin, it's what I told you. My people, they're busy all the time." So Kevin's looking at this situation, and he's saying, whoa, wait a second. There's a lot of capacity here that's being lost. There's a lot of waste here that's happening in the vicinity of the bottleneck. And the boss, who's been looking at this for 16 years, doesn't see any capacity available at all within his system, and his people are busy all the time. And to me, that's a wonderful metaphor for government. We are busy all the time. We're working our fingers to the bone. We're working so hard for our customers, but yet we may be overlooking capacity, just like the boss did there within the welding and the bumper plant. So we want to ask ourselves, what's our blue light? So if you are the person that does code enforcement, or one that facilitates home loans, does the visitations and the parking lot oversight, perhaps has in charge of projects, each of those would have their own blue light. But what percentage of our time do we actually work on our blue light? And how much percentage of our time are we somehow doing other tasks? Are we perhaps like servicing the machine and not really focusing on what we need to do in an optimal way?
Alfredo, that actually leads to a wonderful question that we got into the chat while you were giving the story.
Okay, great. Lay it on me.
For an organization that's constantly putting out fires, how do they slow down long enough to look at realizing efficiencies and improvement? And is there a way to give yourself some breathing room to be able to focus on these improvements?
So yes, absolutely possible for organizations that are putting out fires and racing from one to the next. I think after we see the bead game played out in the simulation that we have today, after we look at a few simple but straightforward tools to be able to leverage improvement, we'll be able to start thinking more proactively and reacting less to the situations that are going on around us. So there's an expression that I like that says, work in government doesn't get better or easier as it ages with time. So we have to move into a virtuous cycle where we're able to get our work done before it catches fire and starts to draw attention, before the work ages and somebody calls into the boss, or worse, the governor, or worse, the legislature, or worse, somebody in the Senate, right? We have to be able to get ahead of that game. And so moving into that sometimes is as simple as listening to and applying the principle of the blue light, but it's never sufficient to do so. So another way to do it is to ask yourself, how do we gain more focus in the organization? How do we identify what the constraint is and then help support that constraint? So let's ask that question again at the end and see if there aren't some strong answers based upon today's presentation that don't come to mind for you in your office and what you can achieve. But that is the entire aim of this presentation, is to take organizations out of that reactive mode and put them in a proactive mode. Why? Because organizations that have 40% of rework are dysfunctional, and organizations that are able to reduce the amount of rework to 15% or lower is a very functional and very effective, approaching world-class, which is about 5% of rework. And in government rework, that's our defects. That's something that comes off the line and doesn't work and has to be redone. So one of the things that that we've turned to, and the Blue Light story is from that community, is the theory of constraints. It's this idea that if you apply a lever at the right spot, that it can, like a simple machine, get you moving in the right direction to try to address it. So that when, even though we may be firefighting everywhere, there are just a few levers, even in complicated operations, even in operations where we may not be aligned, there's a few levers that can help us. And the primary lever is at the bottleneck, finding the bottleneck and improving the bottleneck, just like Kevin did in the Blue Light story. Theory of constraints founded on scientific method, and it focuses on system level improvements and says that if we all focus on our local optima and don't focus on system wide, we may be squandering our improvement efforts. And that's something that you'll see very strong today in the presentation.
Alfredo, we're 30 minutes into the event, by the way.
Well, then we better get moving. Right, David?
Yes, thank you. So one of the key tools to improve at the bottleneck, like Alfredo was talking about, is what we call the interference diagram. And it's a pretty amazing tool. Some of you have seen it actually live in an organization. It can be used as part of an ongoing process improvement project, but to be honest, you could deploy it just to solve, a problem in a one-off kind of fashion. And we consider it a game or an activity. So the first step is that you assemble a group, which is actually a little harder to do than it sounds. So you need the experts in the room that know about the process and can really provide that knowledgeable input, that subject matter expertise. Here's where a lot of people will make the mistake. A lot of people will keep the naysayers out of the room, right? They'll say, oh, well, so-and-so believes that this could never get better, so let's not even bother inviting them. However, this is the point at which you really, really want them to be there, because this is all about overcoming obstacles. And the naysayers are really good at thinking of obstacles, whereas we that are a bit more optimistic might gloss over those obstacles when in fact they're real and significant. So you've got everybody in a room. The next thing you do is you put the goal on the board, right? So usually that's the goal of the process, right? For code enforcement, it might be ensuring that all homes, meet all of the standards of the area with, very few instances of where you have to go back multiple times to solve a problem, that sort of thing, right? So you have the description on the board, and that's a good activity as well, because it ensures that everybody's on the same page about what the process is trying to accomplish. I can't tell you how many times Alfredo and I will go to an organization and that's not the case. They don't agree on what the goal of the process is, which if you don't agree on the goal, improvement will be extremely difficult, because improvement is progress towards the goal, right? The third step is what you see here in the orange or pink ovals, and those are all the obstacles to the goal. So, examples: quality review takes too much time. There's a lot of research required. Or here's one that comes up a lot in government: incomplete forms. They submit an application or a form to us, it's incomplete, so we have to send it back, right? That causes us challenges. Now, these aren't things that prevent us from accomplishing the goal. They just serve as obstacles. They make the goal more difficult. One of the rules of the game at this point is that if somebody thinks it's an obstacle, we put it on the board, whether everyone thinks that's an obstacle or not. It's important to get all of those out of there, out of the folks onto the board, because it's kind of cathartic to be able to speak like that in a group about what the real problems are, but also because you want everyone to have buy-in on the solutions, and you can't do that if you're telling people, or if I'm telling people that, oh, what you think is an obstacle is not really an obstacle. Okay, so number 4, There you go. Great. So number 4 is to brainstorm the solutions and write them down. So what we do at this point is we actually hand out very large sticky pads with markers and have everybody write down solutions or mitigations to those obstacles. It doesn't have to completely solve the problem. It just has to make the problem, it just has to take a chunk out of it, if you will. Just make it a little bit better, right? So it might be that on incomplete forms, one idea would be to see if the system will prevent them from submitting a form that doesn't have all the required information, right? Or it could be that for ASAP requests come in, it's not first in, first out. You have to have a director's level authorization to be able to skip the line. Those kind of things. So everybody writes down their ideas, and the rules are everyone has to think of at least one idea, but also every obstacle has to have at least one idea on it. And this is a fantastic motivational part of the exercise because, you know, as many obstacles as there are, and as many of them as are real and significant, we have a lot more than that in terms of ideas. Usually we have 3 or 4 ideas to each obstacle that are on there by the time we're done. And this goes up on a whiteboard. It's very big. Everyone can see. And sometimes Alfredo and I will make the participants go up there and put the ideas up on the board themselves. It's very interactive. The last step in the activity is to ask, so what are we resolved to do right now, today? Because, you know, some of these ideas will require, I mean, we've seen ideas that require state legislative approval in order to be done, right? They're law changes or something like that. We've also seen ideas that they just need the manager to say, yes, go forth and do good. So, you know, we ask them, what are we resolved to do right now to make this problem better? And you'd be surprised perhaps how many times real change is undertaken immediately because of this exercise. It's really tremendous. And if you want to see a video, there's a video of Alfredo walking a group through this with open records process on the website linked below. But we chose open records because everyone has open records. Everyone in government does that. But you can do it with absolutely any process. Great. So the next step kind of in the theory of constraints that we want to talk to you about is why is TOC such a powerful tool? Why is it such a powerful addition to Lean and Six Sigma for government? Our methodology uses a lot of Lean and Six Sigma tools, but the theory of constraints is the backbone. The way I like to explain theory of constraints is to say, you've heard the expression, a chain is only as strong as the weakest link. So if you're not improving at the weakest link, you're not improving the chain, right? The chain is not getting better. And it's the same in processes, right? There's a slowest or weakest part of the process. And if that's not getting better or faster, then neither is the process. So if you're interested in reading more, which I suggest that you do, the founder of Theory of Constraints, his name is Eliyahu Goldratt, and he wrote this book you can see the image for. It's called The Goal. And that's where he really expands on the concept of theory of constraints. It's actually what they call a business novel. It's a fiction story, but as many TOC books as I've read, I still like this one the most. I think most TOC folks are the same way. But Alfredo's going to take you through a simulation that kind of shows you how theory of constraints operates in government. You can see here that we have a simple 5-step process. Each one is signified by a letter, A, B, C, D, and E. And then at the top, you can see how much work each one of those units, each one of these folks can do in an hour, 10, 8, 5, 7, 9, right? So that's how much work they can process at a quality level. Alfredo?
Okay, so we need everybody to sort of get their thinking caps on and get ready to engage, because we want to chat your questions, want to chat your ideas, especially your ideas of improvement. So you're going to see a really, really simple system, a really, really simple work system, and then we're going to strive to improve that simple work system. And you're going to see the ability to improve a system without additional resources, just like the one that you see, or like the one that might be functioning in your office. So, and we're using beads to symbolize work. So a small bead symbolizes that piece of work. It could be an eligibility determination. It could be a permit. It could be an application. All of those things will then flow through the system. And here you can see that we have 5 stations, A, B, C, D, and E. And each one of these can sort of represent either an individual or it can represent a group of individuals functioning together. So we have Albert, Brenda representing B, Charlie, Dan, and Elise. Okay, and the beads are going to be working through it. So Albert will do 10 units per hour because that's what he can do, and he'll pass it to Brenda, who can do 8 units per hour. Any questions? Let me see if anybody has any questions before we take a closer look at this. Okay, so
There are no questions in the chat right now.
So here we see the simulation of Albert passing to Brenda the 10, and then she then passes on to Charlie those 8, but Charlie can only do 5. You can see that left behind there, the other 3 that he received. And so the 3 that Charlie has and the 2 that Brenda has, they become backlog. And you notice there was no backlog for D and E because they had plenty of capacity to be able to do those 5. Okay, so a simple sort of scenario there, right? And we learned so far, can anybody guess what the constraint is there? Can somebody type it in for me?
We are seeing the answer C.
All right, so C is the constraint there. And we can see that there is still work in process in the system. And the question is for everyone on the call is work in the process the same thing as backlog? Or is backlog just when work ages and is waiting for human effort to be able to do? In other words, we don't have enough hours in the day to be able to do that. And then finally, what's the graduation rate? The graduation rate, 5, that's right. So 5 is the amount that was flowing through the system, and 5 got hung up in the system as we went through. So let's take this simple system and let's do this simulation. Let's run 100 beads of work, 100 eligibility applications for Medicare. What you fill it in. One of the things that we talked about, David Brower was talking about, was code enforcement. So those tickets that come in for code enforcement. Those could be the beads as well. Okay, so let's take a look at the simulation, and we can see as it comes in, the public demand is 10, and it comes in relentlessly, right, from the public. And every hour, the public is demanding 10 of these to be done. And it goes into Albert, who does what he can do, which is 10, and then to Brenda, but she can only do 8 at a time, and then to Charlie, who can only do 5 every hour, okay? And so then you can see the results of this simulation where you have 50 beads of work in backlog and 50 beads of work achieved. So only half of the work is achieved, and now we have more beads in backlog, which is going to perhaps catch fire and cause issues as the work starts to age. So how can we improve this system? Can someone chat in? What are some ideas that you all have as to how we can improve this system?
We have an answer of hire another C, another Charlie.
Okay, so we have one idea is that we get additional resources and concentrate them at that C position, which would then double the capacity of C, right? Well, first of all, we'd have to pay for it, right? So either hire another person or overtime or something, but we would have to pay for that additional resource. And also, if C moved to 10, what would be the new speed of the system? Would the system be operating at 10?
Potentially no, because other resources have less capacity than 10.
Right. So 7, for example, that's what Dan is working at, right? Okay, we got another idea here, right? Can you read it, please?
cross-train some other letters to help out with C, or
Okay.
cross-train A to be able to help out with C.
So a great idea, right, is to get some cross training flowing, because already George has identified that there could be capacity in our system. And where should we target our efforts, do we think? Where we have, in government, we have limited time to be able to do improvements, right? So we need to start to focus our effort. And the question is, where should we focus our effort?
To get the most out of optimizing Station C or Charlie.
Right, right, because that's our immediate bottleneck, our bottleneck that has it. And it dictates the team's productivity, okay? So if C, for example, was able to move up to 7, then what would be the new capacity of the system per hour? 7.
7.
Okay.
And we do have another item here, which is to see if there's anything that C or B needs to get their capacity up, and like a helper or better
Yeah.
software, more training, something like that.
Excellent ideas. Excellent ideas. In many cases, we find that nobody's even asked the constraint or the bottleneck what they need, right? And that folks aren't necessarily subordinating themselves to the C. They're just getting their work done and then dumping it on C, as opposed to making that C is receiving things full kit, and that there's good communication within the office. And here's an interesting question. From what you just saw of the simulation, does it help to put more beads in the system than the system can handle? Okay, so let me ask you this.
The answer is no. It seems it would just be like frustrating, or the problem becomes more obvious.
Yes,
if you have
exactly,
more.
David. That's exactly right. So look, imagine that A did an improvement project, right? That Albert did an improvement project with his team, and he moved his team from 10 units an hour to 14. That would only make the situation worse. Or conversely, let's say that Dan worked with his team to get from 7 units per hour to 11. Would it make a difference? No, because they're still only receiving 5 per hour. So improvement efforts have to target at C. And I love these two quotations from Ellie Goldratt. An hour lost at the bottleneck is an hour lost for the entire system, because the bottleneck determines the productivity for the system. And an hour saved at a non-bottleneck is a mirage, okay? So going to our riddle that David brought up, why is theory of constraint such a powerful addition to Lean and Six Sigma in government? It's showing us where to target our efforts so we get the most out of it, and the team will immediately see the result. Because once the constraint starts to produce to expectation, we'll see it across. And really what you did, and when you all did this analysis and chatted into the room, you identified what the constraint was right away. You identified it as C. Then you asked yourself, what do we need to do to get the most out of C? Does the C need more training? Does the C need more software? Does the C need an assistant? What does C need to be more effective, more efficient, to have quality results? Maybe we're giving C where C has to do the research and call back again because the phone numbers are not correct, or about a third of the addresses need to be verified. But and we're slowing down C. But if we start to exploit C and figure out how to squeeze the most out of that limited resource, then the whole team will benefit. And we need to subordinate ourselves as well. We need to make sure that the constraint doesn't get overworked, that the constraint is not getting things that are not quality. We don't want the constraint to work on junk. And we want to make sure that the constraint is fully supported to be able to operate optimally. That may mean that one of us, when the constraint is sick, or the C, Charlie, is on vacation, that one of us has to get cross-trained, but we're up for it. We're up to subordinate ourselves so that that productivity never stops, and we're able to keep the whole system working to serve the people, to serve the public. And then sometimes, as we had with the first suggestion that we had, sometimes we need to elevate the constraint. Sometimes we can elevate it inside, like some of the ideas were to redeploy some of the effort at E or A and redeploy that within the organization. Certainly that's a type of elevation. And sometimes when you've tried all of the other elements to optimize the system, you have to hire. But by that time, you've got an argument for leadership of why you need it and how that will affect productivity, and that's calling element. And then you have to go back. I'm going to show you another sim here. And we want to conceptualize this idea of listening to the constraint as the drum, having a little bit of work in front of the drum that's quality controlled so the drum never works on junk and it always has enough to work on. And then the rope symbolizes communication to be able to let in more work. And again, the principle that we've talked about is if we put more beads than it can handle, it's going to jam up the system. So if we only
and Alfredo, we're at 10 minutes.
Yes. We're how many minutes?
10 minutes left.
10 minutes. Okay, so we're going to go full force for the next 10 minutes, and then we're going to have some questions if folks have time. So you could just see right there that the 5 moved through the system as part of the simulation, and that there were no hangups. There was no aging in the system. It went in FIFO, first in, first out. There wasn't any struggle with what to do next. There was less friction and less strain on the team. And we weren't stopping one task to focus on another. The customers didn't have a reason to expedite. But as we said at the beginning here, we're only doing 5 per hour. So how do we get closer to what public demand is? Public is demanding 10 per hour in this situation. And we can provide 5 per hour in a functional way and optimize that, but it still doesn't meet demand. So I think it's pretty clear what the answer is not. The answer is not just jam in more beads, which is what most of the time supervisors and managers do is they just jam in more beads. They dump out their inbox and pour it into the inbox of B, who dumps out their inbox as best they can and pours it into the inbox of C. And D and E are very glad to have very limited work that trickles their way. So if we're able to do the 10 and move through the system there, perhaps there is capacity that's demonstrated that I think it was George that pointed out, right? Capacity that may be at A or that may be at E, and maybe we can redeploy that. So there's capacity right here in this system, this limited example that's available. And we can see that capacity when we do the sim and show the empty beads. So as the empty beads move forward, we can see that we've got a capacity of 5 available in A, 3 available in B that wasn't needed. C is always using all of his capacity. D has a capacity of 2, and then E. So perhaps we can redeploy those 14 beads and push it left and right and retrain individuals as required. Or in case of a large teams, we'd actually move individuals, or we might ask Elise here to work on Tuesdays and Thursdays to help out C and bump up C from 5 to 7, as in the example. So we can reallocate the 14 beads with that potential that's being wasted right now. It's being squandered, and redo that. Then we can ask ourselves, if we do some of these ideas that you all chatted in, can we move C from 7, now that we've redeployed capacity, to 8? Can we buffer it so it never runs out at work? Can we bypass C when it's not required? If C doesn't have to look at something based on criteria, can it bypass straight to D? Has anybody asked C what they really need to do their work effectively, and can we provide that? Can we make sure that C doesn't work on junk and things don't get all the way through the system, only have to be reworked again through quality control? So we can then increase by 1 bead per hour here, just one bead per hour, and redistribute the capacity that we have. And let's see the impact of that. Now let's see the improvement model as it runs through. So now you can see that we can have 8 move through the system. 8 is moving through the constraint rate here, and it can be connected also to allow more to flow in, and then it moves all through the system again without any issue, an increase of 60% productivity with no additional resources. You check the logic, right? We gatekeep only to let in what the system can handle. That reduces multitasking, that reduces expediting, that reduces WIP in the system. And I don't know if it was Jane or Heather that asked the question, how do we get out of firefighting mode? But this is a huge help. This is a huge help because when we're multitasking, we're moving from a task that we haven't finished to jump on another task that's super duper hot and causes our attention on that because somebody expedited a request. Then we're losing our capacity. We're reducing what we can do. And again, we want to target at the constraint. So the whole organization will feel improvement when the constraint moves forward. Let's look at this simulation at now the full speed, right? And we can see that the drum is keeping the pace of what we can allow. And when the drum is done, the constraint is done, it says done loudly to the team. And that way we have Albert that's able to allow in 8 more. Okay. And so
there's a question.
Go ahead, Chris.
There's a question in the chat here, which is the line balancing or cross training is not always possible. What do you recommend in cases where special skills or other things are needed to make it possible to add capacity to the constraint?
Okay, wonderful. That brings us to what we're going to talk about next with some additional tools. And I would argue, even though this looks like what we might call a balanced line, it's my belief that, at least in my experience in government, there's never really a balanced line. We always have to pay attention to what is the constraint and then gatekeep the flow of work in to optimize the constraint. We need to ask our team to do the most public value that it can. But we can't ask them to do more than what they can do with the tools that they have because they'll only work slower. So let's start working and providing them more tools. Here's the first tool, a strategic compass. David, we're running a little short on time, but I'm going to hand it to you with about 5 minutes to go.
No, great. Okay, not a problem. So this is what we call a strategic compass, as Alfredo said. Excuse me. This is how we bring the concept of the bead game to a specific organization, to a specific process. This is what kind of makes the exercise real. So what you would have, you see here, the same exact steps, the A, B, C, D, E, across the top, and you see that there's a heartbeat next to C because that's the constraint that's been identified. Alfredo, can you advance it for me? There are these necessary conditions up here across the top. What would make it important and necessary? What's required to make this process work? Teamwork, effective communications. And gatekeeping is one that's very, very important. A lot of people believe and try to use prioritization to get out of these kind of backlog problems. Prioritization does not get the work done faster. It just puts the beads in order. It doesn't actually make the move, right? So what you have to do is strategic gatekeeping, as Alfredo was showing, is keep it out of A so that the system does not get overwhelmed throughout. And that will be critical to overcoming backlog and issues like that. And then we also have a number of measures that we do around the constraint: cycle time, rate of production, the amount of WIP in the system. Because if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And if you can't manage it, you can't improve it. Measurement is critical. The last component that you see is around the control point or the constraint. We starts as a constraint and we turn it into a control point through these processes here. So the workflow, this is just a narrative description of what good looks like. The workflow system produces quality beads that meet public demand without delays or backlog. They're always quality checked beads because if C works on something and then we have to throw it away, that's not quality. We've wasted time at the constraint, which is the most critical point in the process. Alfredo, thank you. So this is an actual process using the exact same structure, the strategic compass. Do you want to advance all the way through it? There you go. Thank you. So some of the measurements, right? For example, the number of invoices paid, which is a measure of productivity. The number paid after 30 days. Their goal here is in 30 days. So that would be a quality measure, right? How often are we achieving what we define as quality? Very important measure. the number of invoices that are bumped back. How many did we let into our controlled system that in fact we never should have let into our control system, right? We call it a tracking reasons for defect or reasons for late. It's not about blame. It's simply about getting it to where we continuously improve over time. And then this description, again, is important. The accountant approves payments and enters payments in the general ledger without errors or confusion. We pay within 30 days of receipt. The correct cost center is debited, and the gate-kept work is accomplished better and better and faster and faster. If our improvement processes, if our improvement ideas do not focus around doing what we just described, then maybe we shouldn't do them, because as we know, if we're not improving at the constraint, we're not improving the process, right? Next slide, please. So the purpose of a strategic compass, it's a definition of what good looks like. It's kind of the bead game in reality. It's a simple picture of the system, and it helps us see the system as a system. A lot of people tend to believe that their work is simply something they do. It's not a process. But in fact, it is a process. It's a system, and the strategic compass helps you see it that way. And then we use it to focus on the constraint and focus our improvements after we've identified what that constraint is. One of the ways you improve at the constraint is through standardized work. It's simply the best way we know how to do the work at the time, right? A lot of people see standardized work as restrictive, but in fact, if implemented correctly, it can be emancipating, because it's not about telling you exactly how to do your entire job. Standardization is about enabling you to use your analytical thinking, critical thinking, and your judgment to do your blue light, right? Not timesheets, not making sure that you have all the correct boxes on your report. None of that. That stuff is as Alfredo would say, it's Rudy poo, right? That's the kind of perfunctory stuff that you don't need to use your gray matter on. What you need to use your gray matter for is the blue light, right? And standardization is about focusing on blue light. Some simple examples, standard operating procedures, if they're kept up to date, mistake proofing, making sure that, forms can't come in incomplete, things like that, or simply using templates. And it's not about that you can never change the process. Standardization is just saying, this is the best way we've seen yet to do this work. Now, when a better way comes along, we will all do it that way because that's the best way. That's standardization. Alfredo, next slide, please. One example of standardization is a checklist. As Malcolm Gladwell says, no, it's okay. Let's go to Atul Gawande. So one of the best examples of a checklist is from Dr. Gawande. He is a Stanford and Harvard trained surgeon, and he used checklists after studying Boeing in the operating room of major hospitals. And so all it is it's a simple, you can download it, I believe. It's a simple 8.5 by 11 checklist with 19 items on it. And it's simple stuff like, do we have the right blood type and do we have enough of the blood? Do we all know what we're doing here today and what each of our roles are in the surgery? Do we know what limb we're operating on? Things like that, simple things. But those simple things have increased, or excuse me, I was gonna say increased effectiveness, but decreased complications at major hospitals, and even resulted in the decrease of deaths by 42%, and not at small rural hospitals where they may make a lot of mistakes. No, these are at places like Johns Hopkins and the Mayo Clinic that have just a simple 19-point checklist. And so maybe if it's good enough for these surgeons, maybe it'll work in government too. Do we want to move?
There is a question in the chat.
Oh, yes, please.
What is the effect of standardization or blue light on Murphy? I assume redux of clutter and chaos has a positive effect. And what do you see in government?
Absolutely. There's a great effect, a very positive effect on things like error rates when you use standardizations, because a lot of people fall into a trap of, well, I've been doing this for a long time, and so I know what I'm supposed to include on the such and such report. So I really don't need a checklist. But it tends to be those folks that tend to make the most mistakes or leave things out, because the new folks tend to resort to that checklist, right? And so that standard, just checklist as an example, but all those forms of standardization really help to decrease the number of unintended consequences that you have on your process, because you've sat down and you're going through them step by step. The other thing is, if there are discrepancies between the way I do it and the way Alfredo does it and the way somebody else does it, that is brought up to management kind of instantly, because the checklist would be validated across the board, right? So we kind of make sure that the customer gets the same experience and level of quality because it's standardized. It's a great question. Alfredo, would you like to move down to journey boards?
Okay, so so this is just a picture of value stream maps. Very much a lean tool, has a great benefit in organization. A value stream analysis is understanding the relative value of each of the steps and then trying to optimize the value added. Here we have just improvement method. There are many improvement methods for it. This one is the one that we see works good in government, where we develop a charter, we decide what good looks like, we map out the current state, we analyze the current the gaps in the organization, build the future state, launch it in a big presentation to the executive director, and then finally sustain the gain. And projects are the key to this. You can't just wish improvement and then get to it. You have to do it. So what we've done is adapted some of these other flow boards for government so that we can really get the bead game alive in government and optimize it and help organizations make better and better decisions with the limited time and resources that they have, and make commitments to each other as it moves through. Because agreement on the situation is the largest obstacle to collaboration. And with the board, you erase that. It becomes very obvious what we need to do. And now it's a question of where can we move these markers next week within the required amount of time? Who's going to do the work? What obstacles do we see? And how do we conquer those obstacles? So you can see Boeing using this with their engineers. Here's another group. These are monitors and auditors that are using it through these groups. They're using color to denote time. You can see the names of the folks that are on the left. There's so many ways to do these boards. Here's a major US city that unlimbered this concept in their economic development, identified what their constraint was, which was design, especially stage 3, and then was able to get the beads flowing, so to speak, through their city of Austin. Also, there's a couple students of David and I that deployed this in the city of Austin to get their contracts to the city council. And here's another one. This is an IT where we see development as the constraint and it moves through. So I think that's enough for you all to be able to ask a few questions. If you can remain in the chat room and here, David and I are happy to remain for the next 15 or so minutes. You're seeing some results there because what our hope is that the next time that you all offer those round wheels, people who are pushing with the square wheels will stop and be able to get themselves out of firefighting mode by utilizing some of these principles to help the team move forward, and then take what we imagined at the beginning of it and turn it into reality. David?
Yeah. So, before we take questions, if you want to know more, if you want to learn more about Lean or Six Sigma theory of constraints, the way we implement it in government, there's lots of different ways to go about that. We are posting stuff on LinkedIn. Recently, we posted an article just about how remote work can be done, especially process improvement remote work in this kind of environment. We love emails. We love to hear about what you're doing in your organizations, challenges you might be having, or successes. We actually really like when people we've worked with email us back and just say, hey, look, this is how we've done it. And then on our website, you can also find different methodology, a little bit more about the GQI methodology that Alfredo just went through. There's some training videos. One I mentioned, which is the interference diagram. There's another one on how this can be used to fairly effectively gather business requirements. If you're thinking of deploying a new system, a new IT system, try to do this first. It's better to not pave the cow paths, as we say. And then there's a lot of conference presentations on different topics. Interference diagramming is one of them, but also just COC, theory of constraints in government. And and a number of others. So, we'd love to hear from you. Like Alfredo said, how do you think this might impact your work? What do you see as constraints within your organization, your processes? We would love to hear from you.
Chris, thank you so much for excellent facilitation of that. And do we have any questions?
You can unmute yourself if you would like.
Alfredo, I have one for you while people are thinking. When we say someone is a constraint, does that just mean they're the slow one? Does that mean they're the kid with the heavy backpack on the Boy Scout trail in the goal?
So most often we find the constraint to be the most valuable resource on the team. When we look at a doctor's office, for example, it's the doctor, or or it might be the engineer or the attorney in an attorney's office. It's often what creates the value that the customer is willing to pay for. It often is the most costly in an organization. It's what the organization is paying the most to do, and it's what creates the value.
So it's not a bad thing to be the constraint.
It's often the most important thing.
Right.
David, you had a question?
Yeah, y'all, how often is constraint just like a personality issue thing where people aren't liking each other? And I, just an anecdotal example, we had a legal department that would take weeks and weeks to get stuff reviewed for us, and it was a huge constraint. Then a new person came in, we were assigned a new attorney, and they got stuff done for us in a day or two max. And I think it was just maybe they were quicker or they focused on us more, but that was just an issue of which attorney we were assigned. So anyway, there's two things.
So it may be, David, it may be that it's an issue of an attorney that you're assigned, but it could be that one attorney that they both had the same amount of talent, but maybe when you measure them and they realize that they're part of a team, and then you communicate effectively, that they both rise to that level of communication. And that if they're able to accomplish those reviews, we know how many reviews on average they can accomplish. In one organization where we worked with it, we took they were taking 18 days to do a review on average. I know I went through the ledgers and the books. And now they're doing just over 7 to be able to do that once we're able to measure them. Many of the same attorneys, but now they are operating at a good rate because a lot of the questions that why you're taking so long were actually answered by the organization that they supported. One of the things that we discovered when we looked at why attorneys were taking so long is because they were proofing, they were doing checks, they were finding things like the wrong document was attached, that there was the wrong scope of work. They were finding things like there were rudimentary spelling and grammar errors that they were taking the time to be able to do. So we got rid of those and started to get them contracts full kit. And another thing that they didn't know is whether the contract had been changed since the last time they reviewed it. That might mean a difference between another 8 hours of reading the contract and being able to do it within 1. So we were able to take, in this particular team that we worked with, we were able to take them to 26 reviews per week per attorney, David. And then that meant that there was an 84% chance that if you turned a contract into that department, you got it back within 6 working days. And it was a 96% chance that you would get that contract back within 10 working days. And it was a 100% chance that the general counsel, the head attorney in the office, would know about it if it took more than 10 days and be asking the question, why? Did we identify? So sometimes it is personality, sometimes it is capability, but we like to think that a good solid system that's well measured, we have a capacity, we understand how many beads go through, we all have a shared purpose, and we're aligned with what we're trying to provide the citizens. That's what makes the difference. Will people have to be fired and replaced? Yes, I understand that. That's a management, but that's not necessarily a continuous improvement question. They need the structure to do their best.
That's great. And, you know, that brings one thing to mind. One of the reasons I think maybe why reviews started going quicker for us is we went to standardized contracts that were PDF fillable forms. So just like you said, the attorney could know it hadn't been changed. So it's great.
That's right. And so that's another thing that we did. That's excellent point. So the TNCs, we decided to lock the TNCs in for the duration of the contract. So yeah, we want to change a TNC, and that's a really great idea. But we'll do that the next contract. As it moves through the system between, you know, B and D and E, we resolve to keep the same TNCs and only change the template that we have. The other thing that we put is we put the template in one direction. We discovered that using the wrong template was one of the primary causes of the attorneys having to kick back those contracts. So we made sure that everybody was using the correct template as we did. So yeah, I mean, there's nothing more amazing than to see an attorney who's craft oriented realize that, oh my goodness, I'm part of this larger machine, this creation of value. And if I do these few things and I collect best practices and I realize what work, then I can be part of a very successful machine and not be the constraint in it.
It's a great example too of where standardization ended up being emancipating instead of restrictive. Right. Because now everyone can do their real work because we're not sitting there rereading the same exact terms of the same exact contract for the 15th time this month.
Does that make sense, David? Go ahead. Go ahead, Chris. I'm sorry.
That sure does. Thank you.
And thank you so very much for that. At this time, we're going to end the recording for our presentation. We're going to continue the Q&A section. But thank you very much for watching this presentation from the recording perspective.